Welcome to the NBA slate breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Brent Hyden. Eight-game slate tonight. A really fun eight-game NBA slate on Monday to kick things off here. You and I were talking before the show. You mentioned not a game that you're on that slate that you're even looking to avoid. Like, this is just a prime spy here.
Yeah, pretty much every game is appealing. None of them, except for like maybe one or two, look like they're going to be blowouts. Pretty decent totals in the majority of them. Everyone seems appropriately priced around the industry, and unfortunately, I guess the biggest downside to today's slate is basically everyone in the NBA is probable tonight. So injury news again is going to play a pretty important role, but does look like a fun slate to break down, and going to enjoy building lineups today.
Yeah, let's dive in here. Milwaukee, Indiana, first one, 214 over under. This is a game, obviously, we just saw a few nights ago. So we do have a little bit of sample size from these two teams playing. Starting with this Milwaukee side, we saw Brogdon get into the lineup, start at over Tony Snell. I know you have a lot of interest in him tonight. You wrote about him in your GPP article. One, he's just way too cheap.
Yeah, it's more in DraftKings where he's a little too cheap. He's a guy who's been just incredibly consistent recently with his minutes and his production, getting in the mid to high 20s for the majority of his most recent games. He's 4,800 on DraftKings. I think he's a guy that could break the 30 fantasy point barrier tonight. And for what you're kind of looking at on this slate, there's not a lot of great value options, so you're kind of looking in the lower mid tier for guys that can get you 28, 30 fantasy points. And I think he's a guy that can do that. It's going to take away some of the usage from the other guys on that starting lineup with Middleton and Bledsoe playing alongside him. And like, depending on how their offense shakes out, like, I don't think he's going to end up being matched up on Victor Oladipo too often, which is pretty darn appealing for a guy like him. So I like him a lot in cash games, and he's a guy that I think you can look at in GPPs, given his price.
Do you have any preference whether he comes off the bench or gets in the starting lineup?
Not really. Like, I think he probably stays in the starting lineup. That's kind of how I envisioned that they would roll the lineup that they would roll out whenever Bledsoe got traded over there anyways. I think he's better in that starting lineup. And I think part of the reason why they want him in the starting lineup is because of how well he plays with Giannis. So I think he's going to continue to stay there.
Yeah, I do too. With him being in there, it kind of takes a little less appeal for me from Middleton, especially on tonight's slate with so many shooting guards in play. Like, him and Bledsoe are they're usable, but not my favorite options off this Bucks side.
Yeah, neither one of them are cash game viable for me. Given the matchup, I think they can both be considered in GPPs just because, especially with Middleton, you're just getting a ton of minutes. And if some of those shots fall for him, because I mean, he's got double-digit field goal attempts in 10 straight games, at least, just looking back at his game log. Some of these 14, 17, 18 field goal attempts in some of these games. A couple of those shots fall for him and he gets some of those extra peripherals. I think you can get an upside game out of him, but for that price, you're really just kind of looking at him in GPPs. And the same goes for Bledsoe. There's a bunch of really good mid-priced point guard options that I think I would rather target. But again, this game looks to be appealing. There should be a decent amount of fantasy production in it. So I don't mind any of those guys in GPPs.
Oh, I don't either. I like Giannis quite a bit here tonight. I think he could potentially get overlooked just because we have Curry in a good spot. We have Paul, obviously LeBron, Jimmy Butler, all these guys. Absolutely crushed Indiana just the other night. Put up over 55 fantasy points in just 29 minutes against Indiana. Obviously, if this game stays close, which I anticipated too, just another good spot, especially when he's lined up against the four against Indiana. Like, there's no one that can contend with him.
Yeah, for sure. With Victor Oladipo back in this game being in Indiana, you would expect it to stay a little bit closer. You mentioned, 57 and a half fantasy points in 29 minutes. That's insane production. Coming off a great game against Washington where he put up 66 fantasy points in 41 minutes. Game stays close. You're going to get, 38, 39, 40 minutes out of Giannis. Bunch of rebounding upside here. Again, Indiana, a team that not great in transition. You would expect Giannis to be able to get out in transition and run here. I definitely like him. Not really breaking any news here that he's a great play tonight. He probably will be one of the overlooked studs given how some of the news could break out. So yeah, I like him in all formats.
As far as John Henson goes, GPPs for me, obviously, just because the mids are inconsistent, but it's a good spot for him. He didn't obviously shine through in that last matchup against them, but these are two of the worst teams against centers in the NBA. He's cheap enough to take a flyer on this slate. Like he has that 30 plus fantasy point upside. And I mean, I like him a little bit more on FanDuel, I guess, where he's power forward eligible. I don't mind him on DK, but I just think like there's other center options too.
Yeah, I almost wrote him up again in the GPP article, but since they just played a couple days ago, I figured I wouldn't do that again. But I do like him a lot in GPPs. Cash games, volatility is there just because Jason Kidd is Jason Kidd, and he literally has stated that, minutes for some of these players come from a lottery system that I guess he runs in his head or some BS, but he's fine. Great matchup here, rebounding upside. I mean, he shot 50% or better from the field in 10 straight games. A couple of extra shots fall his way, and he could put up another one of these, 30 fantasy point games that he put up against Washington. So I definitely do like him. He's a great option. FanDuel, you can look at him in cash. DraftKings, because center, there's a couple better options at center. I don't think you're looking at him there, but if you're building two lineups, a two center lineup on DraftKings, I think he's an option.
Certainly. Let's move over to Indiana here. Obviously, you mentioned Victor Oladipo. He's back, coming off a fantastic game against Chicago. Put up over 50 fantasy points in just 24 minutes. That game was obviously a blowout. Expect this game to stay closer. I have no issue with using Oladipo. Like, I think the 8,600 pricing on DraftKings is pretty nice. He's in that range where there's so many other options. You have shooting guard where you got Butler, you got Lou Williams, you got Eric Gordon. Like all these guys are going to be pretty popular. So I like Oladipo here. He's just a GPP guy for me though.
I like him in all formats. I think you can definitely look at him here. I mean, you mentioned played 24 minutes against Chicago. That was just an absolute beatdown. Still went off though, had 23 points, 5 steals, 9 assists, 6 rebounds. You're getting, all around production out of him. I think he has a ton of upside in this matchup, especially if his shot starts to fall from beyond the 3-point line against a Milwaukee team that is allowing opponents to shoot almost 40% from beyond the arc. I think there's a ton of upside here. I think he has a safe floor. I know his price is up there on FanDuel. He's over 9K, 9.4 to be exact. It's kind of tough to pay, but he's got a pretty solid floor and a really high ceiling. I don't mind him in cash games and GPPs.
As far as the other Pacers go, it's hard for me to get excited about it. I know Sabonis is a guy that's going to be widely talked about today. You'll hear it from us. You'll hear it from other people as well. One, he's just been excellent. I mean, the minutes are there. He's just been basically outplaying anyone in that Indiana front court right now.
Yeah, double-digit shot attempts in 4 straight games. The matchup, obviously, we already mentioned with John Henson. Both these teams, terrible defending centers. They're 29th and 30th in the NBA. Miles Turner's been pretty darn terrible recently, pretty darn terrible for the majority of the season. Sabonis is just outperforming him right now. He's a guy who's coming off the bench and eating up a ton of usage and putting up a lot of production. So he's definitely cash game viable here. I don't know that he has a ton of upside unless some news comes out that he's going to, move into the starting lineup or something like that. But you could still use him in GPPs, I think. But I think he's a better cash game option.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I think, realistically, his ceiling kind of tops out about 30. I mean, 35 is kind of pushing. I know he's hit that over his last 10 games a couple of times, but I mean, he scored 22 and 24 real points over his last 2 games. He only grabbed 2 rebounds. He's a solid rebound against a Milwaukee team that does struggle on the glass. So I kind of expect more than 2 rebounds. Hard to expect him to shoot 75% from the field, but this is just once again a prime spot for him.
Yeah, it really is. It's a good spot for him. It's in theory a great spot for Miles Turner, but given his recent performance and just the way he's played all season long, like you're pretty much only looking at him in GPPs. And I don't you would think this would be a good spot for Thad Young, but I think the season's kind of taken a toll on him. He's been really bad recently. It's pretty much just Sabonis that I'm looking at in that front court.
Yeah, I mean, it's really him and Oladipo in general for this Indiana side. Do you have any interest in anyone else?
I don't mind taking a flyer on Darren Collison, whose price is starting to come down a little bit in a matchup against Milwaukee, who over the last 10 games is ranked 29th in defensive efficiency against point guards. You could look at him. You could look at Joseph, who's coming off the bench and doing a decent job. I will say that I think some of his most recent games and minutes are because Indiana had been getting pretty much blown out by everyone without Oladipo in the lineup. But I mean, he's a guy that you can look at around 4,200, should be able to get you about 20 fantasy points.
Toronto, Brooklyn here next. Obviously, we're looking at this Toronto side pretty heavily. There's a couple of options that are probably going to be fairly popular tonight. We'll start with Kyle Lowry. Underpriced, I feel, for this matchup. And this is a matchup he's thrived in going back forever. Obviously triple-double last time out against them in limited minutes. 7,600 on DK, like he's been the guy that I've just been kind of just clicking in right off the bat.
Yeah, he's just underpriced across the industry. Even on FanDuel, I think he's 7,900, which is still just a little too cheap for upside here. I wrote about him in the GPP article. Obviously, we do expect his ownership to be a little bit high. The last time these two teams played, however, Kyle Lowry is pretty low owned. People, I guess, are just expecting Brooklyn to get blown out every game, so they shy away from some of these players. But I think he's a great option. I talked about, usage being down, field goal percentage being down in some of these games. His minutes have kind of been up and down. Recently, a lot of that has to do with games being blowouts. Even that being said, the rebounding, assist, and scoring upside here against Brooklyn is just insane. I mean, last game, almost 31 minutes, 53.5 fantasy points, had a 10-point, 12 assist, 10 rebound, triple-double. Just tons of upside here. A great option. I absolutely love Lowry. I don't care what his ownership is. And DeMar DeRozan's another guy that I do have a lot of interest in against this Brooklyn team.
Yeah, I kind of feel like DeRozan's going to get a bad rap tonight because he's going to say he's overpriced. Obviously everyone just says he's just a scorer, but his peripheral numbers have been up this year. I like him here. I like at the 8,800 price tag because he's in a range of everyone else. And you have Lou Williams cheaper, you have Butler Oladipo cheaper. I think people aren't going to go there tonight and they expect the blowout, and they kind of don't expect DeRozan to meet his price tag.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned his peripheral numbers. He's doing a lot more ball handling, and we've seen it in some of these games where he's kind of just taking over, and teams are trying to double team him to get him out of his groove. And whenever that happens, he's making the right play and passing out to an open shooter. He has the ability to rack up the assist now, and now that he's added that and the 3-point shot to his game, the ceiling is just so insanely high for him. I guess I can throw out the ceiling is the roof quote from North Carolina. I absolutely love him. He's paid off his big salary several times already this season against Brooklyn, a fast-paced matchup against a defense that's been playing better recently, but is still really bad. It's just a great spot for him. I don't mind building around Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan and even Serge Ibaka, who I think is just an insanely good play under 6K on DraftKings, and I think he's under 6K on FanDuel too. It's 5,900, just an insanely good option there at power forward.
Yeah, Ibaka's a great play tonight. Brooklyn, 24th in defensive efficiency against power forwards. Obviously struggled against centers as well. We saw Ibaka go the 5 last time these two played. Ibaka's a guy that, once again, he's like Lowry, where I'm just kind of looking to get a lot of exposure to those two guys and then kind of sprinkle in some DeRozan.
Yeah, it's the same for me. I think Valanciunas is going to be a guy that's probably popular here tonight, given, he's coming off a game against Milwaukee where he put up 41 fantasy points. He had 20 points and 13 rebounds. I don't think people are going to realize that all 20 of his points, let me verify here. I have it written in my notes, but all 20 of his points came in the third quarter. He didn't score a single point out in the first, second, or fourth quarter. All 20 of them came in the third quarter. So that's a little concerning. His minutes, we talked about it pretty much every time they play. His minutes are just way too up and down. So I don't necessarily want to go there in cash. If you want to in GPPs, that's fine. But it's pretty much just a Ibaka for me. And I guess if you really wanted to look cheap, you could look at Jakob Poeltl.
Yeah, I don't mind it. He's worth a shot if you're playing multiple lineups. With Sabonis and even Henson, who's obviously in a similar situation with his minutes, I'd rather go to them. But I don't hate it. It's a good spot.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyone else want to talk about here?
Um, you might, I mean, I guess Fred Van Vliet's and the DeLon Wrights are interesting if this game gets out of hand, but like for a guy like DeLon Wright, like he's only playing like 19, 20 minutes in close games. You're paying a pretty hefty price tag for him, so I don't necessarily want to go there.
But his ceiling 61 points.
Yeah, his ceiling is like 61 points when he has like 9 steals. But yeah,
Yeah,
he had 4 steals in that game, 13 rebounds. Like, I don't really see that happening again.
no, definitely not. Let's move on to the Brooklyn side. I think a lot of people are kind of just going to avoid the Brooklyn side. Obviously, Damari Carroll's out. Karis LeVert is probable for tonight's game. I don't mind LeVert here, actually. 5,200 on DraftKings, a pretty nice price tag for him. He's been playing really well of late.
Yeah, he's a guy that I do have some interest in. He's kind of playing the backup point guard role at times when Dinwiddie has struggled. He obviously struggled against the Raptors the last time these teams faced. I think he was in the starting lineup for that game. I do prefer him if he comes off the bench, but his recent games before the injury had been really good. He had like 35, 38, 37, 39 fantasy points in his last 4 games. It's a decent option here, especially without Damari Carroll. LeVert has a 24% usage rate and averaging 1.07 fantasy points per minute with Carroll off the floor. He's the guy that I have the most interest in. If you want to roll Dinwiddie, that's fine. I don't really want to try to pick, the Joe Harrises and the Allen Crabs. I don't want to try to pick one of those guys here. It's pretty much just LeVert for me and maybe Dinwiddie. A little bit of exposure to Dinwiddie just because Toronto has struggled against point guards over the last 10 games.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Crab here. One, he's basically just has to get the shot going. If it's not there, which his shot is probably there once in a blue moon, for him to really get off and hit value to the point where you're happy with. There's just too many other guys I think around that range. Like I'd rather go Ariza or Justin Holiday or Kyle Anderson and basically similar price tags.
Yeah, like DraftKings where he's 4,700. There's just no way I'm paying that price. And what is he on FanDuel? He's 4,800. There's just no. I just won't go there. There's the floor is way too low, and there's really not a high ceiling. So I don't really see a reason to try to risk him in your lineups.
Yeah. Rondé Hollis-Jefferson's been one of the more serviceable Nets guys, but tough matchup for here tonight. The price is down, but his production's starting to slip a little bit as well. Might be kind of running into a bit of a wall here. I'm kind of off the train.
Yeah, I don't really like it for him either. A matchup you would expect him to struggle in, not someone that I'm looking at.
Detroit, New Orleans next here, 214 over under. Detroit, obviously, we're waiting on the Drummond news once again. He's questionable. I keep seeing the words pain tolerance. It's all about pain tolerance with him as far as if he plays or not. So apparently the pain's pretty high.
Yeah, one person, we did skip over one person that if you wanted a dart throw at center and on FanDuel and DraftKings and GPPs, Jahlil Okafor, who's starting to play a few extra minutes for the Nets. He's a guy you can look at. But yeah, back to the Detroit, New Orleans. I don't know. Like, I don't know if it's just a broken rib or a bruised rib or whatever, but like my pain tolerance when it comes to my ribs is not very high. So I don't know how Andre Drummond is out there doing what he's doing, but he has not looked very good. When he played against Philly, he looked to be really, really laboring. Would be kind of shocked to see him suit up tonight.
If I eat too much, I will not be moving for like 3 days. So yeah, I'm in the same boat. So I don't expect him to play tonight, which kind of worries me with Detroit. Obviously, just given that their situation's been, they just haven't looked good. They're not getting a lot of production from these secondary options outside of really Tobias Harris. Bradley's been poor. Ish Smith, like it's a good spot for him, but I do feel like he's kind of overpriced. He's 6,500 on FanDuel. 5,700 on DraftKings isn't bad. I mean, he's kind of been around that 25, 30 fantasy point range, but it is a good spot. I just kind of worry about blowouts here.
Yeah, it's really concerning with Detroit being on the road. I was telling you before we started, they've lost like 4 straight road games, and in those 4 straight road losses, they've averaged like 91 points per game. They're just getting destroyed on the road. It does really, really concern me. Like, I'm not someone that tries to focus on predicting blowouts and overthinking blowout situations, but it does concern me a little bit. Ish Smith's fine on DraftKings. Like, I think he's a fine cash game play just because um, the production without Reggie Jackson and without Andre Drummond is pretty solid. I don't mind Tobias Harris. It's a kind of a tough matchup for him, but he's a guy you could look at as well. Outside of that, though, like I don't know. It's kind of tough to trust anyone from the Detroit side of this game.
Yeah, it really isn't. I'm kind of treating this game as basically, I mean, outside of Ish Smith, like it's basically one big GPP game for me. One, I just, a lot of people I don't expect to kind of target the Davises and Cousins tonight. Avery Bradley's below 5K on FanDuel. If you have the stomach for it in GPPs, I don't hate it because he is so cheap and it is a decent spot. And if it stays close, like the minutes are going to be there into the upper 30s as we've seen 2 of the last 3 games. But it's just, once again, like he needs to play 60 minutes to hit 30 fantasy points, it seems.
Yeah, the way he's been playing it does. Reggie Bullock's kind of interesting. If we get the Stanley Johnson news, he's averaging 10.9 points on 56.5% shooting in his 15 starts this season, compared to 1.6 points and 33% shooting in 9 games off the bench. He's a guy that I think you can look at his price. He's like 4,300 on DraftKings against a New Orleans team that kind of struggled against wings, especially wings that can shoot. I don't mind going there. If Drummond sits, I probably will have some exposure to Boban, just because we know Boban is a guy that can just put up insane production in limited minutes. The biggest concern there is obviously foul trouble against DeMarcus Cousins and whether Van Gundy wants to even use him. Like, you are kind of taking a risk at his price on DraftKings and on FanDuel that he's actually going to get the minutes. Outside of that, I guess like Dwight Bikes is a guy that we could talk about who's played a decent amount of minutes and been producing pretty well. He's 3,700 on FanDuel. He's pretty cheap on DraftKings as well. I think his minimum salary
is 3K.
Yeah, on DraftKings, I don't mind taking a shot on him. I think he's a guy that you could see get you, 22, 24 fantasy points, which he's been over 22 fantasy points in 3 straight games. So that would be my Detroit exposure if I even get any.
Yeah. On the New Orleans side, we've seen some historically solid games, obviously from Cousins and Davis, obviously, throughout the years where they've been playing separate apart from each other. But this is a spot where they could eat. I feel like they do kind of cut into each other's true upside a little bit here. I don't mind him in GPPs. It's a decent spot for him, but like they're not a priority for me.
Yeah, I like Davis here just because he's so cheap. I mean, he's under 10K, and generally whenever he's priced that low, like he's an excellent value. He's a guy that I do have some interest in, has had a lot of success against Detroit. That came last season before these two were paired together, but was it 32 points, 13 rebounds, and 2.5 blocks was what he averaged against Detroit last season. Cousins, good history against Detroit as well. Both of them are in play. If Drummond sits, I do have a little less interest actually, because I think the game could end up blowing out. But if Drummond plays, like I think Cousins is very interesting. Downside with him is turnovers. Like on DraftKings or on FanDuel, where you're getting docked heavy for turnovers, like it's really, really tough to use him. I mean, committed 7 turnovers last game. That's 7 fantasy points being taken off your score. So I don't know. Like, I don't know that I want to pay that much for a guy that's turning the ball over as much as he is.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it is something where you kind of look and you see Cousins' line, you're like, oh man, he's got to be over 60. And you're like, wait, he's at 49? And it's because of those 7 turnovers. Like, that is something to note on FanDuel. Like, that is where some of the risk comes in.
Yeah, for sure.
So, as far as anyone else on the New Orleans side, it's basically just those two for me. If I'm getting exposure, I don't really look at the backcourt here.
Yeah, I don't mind. You could roll out Rondo or Holiday if you really wanted to. Rondo's a guy that I hate using because you're basically depending on him getting the peripheral stats because he doesn't do much else. But we've seen upside with him, so both of them GPPs only. Not guys that I would have a ton of exposure to. Even if I was building like 20 lineups, I'd probably have like 1 lineup with each one.
Houston, Chicago next. Massive total here, 221, third highest on the slate. a game that's going to be very popular tonight. We'll start with this Houston side. Obviously a lot of the attention is going to go to Chris Paul, Eric Gordon, just two of the usage hogs on the team. Chris Paul is super expensive on tonight's slate. Like, he's been solid, but like not fantasy solid, like GPP winning solid lately.
Yeah, he's definitely a cash game option here just because, I mean, you're looking at a guy with, a 30% usage rate without James Harden. Minutes have been decent for him, but they are kind of trying to keep him kind of right around that 32, 34 minutes. Like, they're not really wanting to go over that like they have in 3 of the last 4, but D'Antoni doesn't really want to. So, I don't, again, he's fine for cash games. You're not getting the 60 fantasy points you need from him recently. So I don't know that I would use him in GPPs, but he's fine in cash. Eric Gordon actually leads the team in usage now without James Harden on the floor, 30.5%. I do have some interest in him in cash games as well. Again, where he's priced at, especially on FanDuel, he's not winning you. I don't think he's winning you a GPP with the performances that he's going to give you. The 55 fantasy points he had against Golden State, like, I don't think you're seeing that again. Both of them cash games for me, but I think there's better options in GPPs on this team.
Yeah, I think you and I are kind of in a similar boat on this one, just because we're looking at the value kind of more so with this team, and I just think Curry without Durant, like, he has a higher ceiling than Paul here. Oladipo, Lou Williams, DeRozan, all these guys kind of over Gordon in a somewhat similar price range. Like, I kind of just rather go there.
Yeah, it sounded like you had a rocket taking off in
the
background.
I timed that perfectly. Like, I wanted to take off as soon as the Rockets came in.
Yeah. I think if you're looking at this game in GPPs, the guy, one of them I wrote up in the GPP article, and that's Ryan Anderson. Production has been down over the past couple games, but we've seen upside out of him recently against Orlando, which is the game that I wrote him up. Last time he played 30 minutes, had almost 30 fantasy points. This game is away from the Toyota Center. That's where they play in Houston, where he just cannot shoot because the lights bother him. So I do like him here. We know Chicago struggles against power forwards. They're 27th in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games against the position. I think this is a great spot for Ryan Anderson. I think we're looking at 28, 30 fantasy points out of him. He's a guy that I have a lot of interest in, especially on DraftKings, where I can use him at center, but he's really cheap on FanDuel at only 4,100.
Yeah, I think he's a great punt option on this slate. I feel like you're kind of going to build some lineups and end up kind of walking your way into Anderson because he's at that price and you're kind of just looking to fill 1 or 2 spots. So I like him here. The upside's there in this matchup. Guys like Clint Capella, Clint Capella's been in some really good matchups of late, and he just hasn't really shown the upside. I mean, he's been getting these double-doubles, but like, it hasn't been enough for his price tag. He's at 66 now on DK. FanDuel, he is 7,400, which that's too expensive for me. He's only a couple hundred less than DeAndre Jordan. These same prices Love. I don't mind him on DK. I think we can possibly see some upside here. It's a good spot.
Yeah, I like him a little bit. Chicago does a decent job of limiting second chance points and offensive rebounds, so that probably cuts into his ceiling a little bit. But it's still a good spot for him. I do like him. I think on DraftKings, he's definitely cash game viable just because he's going to give you a solid floor here, probably 30, 32 fantasy points with double-double potential. So I like him. Gerald Green's a guy that people are probably going to be off of now that his price is starting to climb. His last game wasn't very good. He's just a guy that does a ton of scoring. He can get you some rebounds and, a couple other of, peripheral stats, but I'm willing to go back to the well on Gerald Green. He's kind of just a man on a mission trying to prove all these teams that overlooked him wrong. So dude's coming in and just shooting the ball a ton whenever he gets in the game. I mean, he has 14, 16, 15 field goal attempts in his last 3 games. That's pretty appealing against a Chicago team that hasn't played the greatest defense this season.
No. Trevor Ariza, you have any interest in here?
A little bit. I mean, I guess the biggest problem with Ariza is minutes. They're trying to get his minutes down just because, I mean, he is getting up there in age and he has been playing a lot of minutes. So I think he's fine in cash games. I don't see a big ceiling out of him for GPPs.
Yeah, they've kind of dropped him down from like 38, 39 to basically 34. Like, I mean, it's a decent difference, but he's still logging over 30 minutes per game here. And his price is way back down. Like he was up over, I think, 6K on FanDuel just the other day, and he's creeping back down.
Yeah, price is like I said, price coming down enough where you can consider him in cash games. But like a part of his value recently was the fact that he was playing like 40 minutes. Now that Gerald Green is there, you're taking shots and you're taking minutes away from him. So he's a guy I think has a decent floor, but not a very high ceiling.
Moving on here, we got Cleveland and we got to talk about Chicago, don't we?
I mean, we can forget about Chicago if you want to.
It was just that rocket threw me off this whole game. Chicago, obviously they got smoked last time out. They had, obviously a day off here. A lot of good price tags on this Bulls team, and against a Houston team that their defense has slipped quite a bit. I know they've played some good offenses of late, but they've been really bad on the defensive side lately.
Yeah, and I guess it starts at point guard. I mean, Houston over the last 10 games ranked 28th in defensive efficiency against point guards. Obviously, some of that could be skewed by Steph Curry just going bananas against him, but Chris Dunn, excellent option. Struggled last game against Indiana. That game was just an insane blowout. But like I kind of wrote about how I think it was a spot where he could struggle. I think he bounces back here. He's a guy that I do have a little bit of interest in, especially on DraftKings under 7K. He's a guy that you could look at. Justin Holiday is a guy that's going to get talked about a ton today. Definitely a good cash game option given his price and the amount of minutes and the field goal attempts that he's taking. GPPs, if he's going to be like 40% owned, which I think he could probably approach that given how much I've already heard him talked about, I'm probably fading, but he's a guy that I do like a little bit as well.
Yeah, and I go back to Dunn real quick. You mentioned that Houston's been struggling, and like you said, I mean, they've played Curry, Westbrook, Irving, Wall, and for the last 10 games. Elfrid Payton had a big game as well. Yeah, I mean, if people are going to be on Holiday, and I think a lot of the reasons are they expect more offense to get pushed to him because Paul's going to be on Dunn. Like, I like Dunn. He's under 7K. Like, I'm probably going to push more chips into the pile than I probably should on Dunn tonight, but he's just a great piece here.
Yeah, I like him a lot. It's kind of the matchup that he could really thrive in, a fast-paced game. It really is a good spot for him, and he's not a guy that I would be scared off of just because, Chris Paul might be guarding him.
Yep. You mentioned Holiday, obviously. Denzel Valentine is a decent small forward option for me tonight. Minutes have been there. Shot attempts have been there. Double-digit in 3 of the last 4 games. Obviously, it's a guy who can chuck from 3, and Houston's been pretty poor defending the 3, especially of late. I don't mind him at 4,600.
Yeah, he's fine. Like, I feel like this is one of those scenarios where, like, we've seen him producing pretty well, and then, like, Hoiberg's going to be like, let's throw David Nwaba out there for 30 minutes and see how he does. So, like, I don't mind it. I think he's probably GPPs only. Like, I don't think you can use him in cash games.
No, for sure. Power forwards has obviously have been basically a couple guys here for Chicago. We see Markin start to play, really well. He's still not playing, supreme minutes, but he's been in the lower 30s for most of the last few games.
And it's not a great matchup for any of these guys, I don't think. Like, I don't know what it is about Houston, but like on the season, they rank second in fantasy points allowed. They're only giving up like 42.87 to power forwards. And like, I mean, they're 22nd in defensive efficiency over the last 10, but like, I just don't like, I think most of that is because of Draymond Green, and that's been pretty much it. We saw Aaron Gordon struggle in this matchup. I don't know. I just don't like, I don't really want to use any of these guys just because like Mirotic, Markkanen, Portis, they all kind of eat into each other. Like none of them, I don't think have a huge ceiling here. So like, I'm not terribly intrigued by any of them.
Yeah, I think with Lyles, Ibaka, and Sabonis kind of in this range, like it makes them easier fades. And I can obviously understand trying to get to some exposure, but I think the exposure is really with the backcourt for Chicago.
Yeah, and you're also looking at like Houston is an excellent rebounding team. They're one of the best rebounding teams in the NBA. That's going to cut into the ceiling of some of these guys. Like there's just better options out there.
Anyone else want to talk about from Chicago?
Nope.
Cleveland, Minnesota, obviously a game that's going to be a great one to watch tonight. We had Cleveland scoring off against Minnesota. Got the Kevin Love narrative. You got Butler going up against LeBron. A good fantasy game here too. I mean, it's still a 222 over under. basically a pick 'em here. Minnesota's favored by 1. We'll start here with Cleveland.
LeBron James. There you go.
All right, logging out.
No, I mean, obviously LeBron is LeBron and he's an excellent play. I was a little worried whenever we knew Isaiah Thomas was getting the start, that he might eat into some of LeBron's production. That obviously didn't happen against Orlando. I don't think it happens today against Minnesota. He's obviously a great play if you want to play him. What did he average? 26 points, 13 assists, and 8 rebounds, and 2 wins over Minnesota last season. So if you want to roll him out there, go for it. High ceiling, high floor, great option in all formats. Kevin Love's interesting in GPPs. You obviously have the revenge narrative. It's a little concerning with his minutes being what they are. He kind of just needs to come out and, shoot the lights out in 26 minutes, or else he's not going to get you to value. And especially on FanDuel where he's center eligible only, it's kind of really tough to use him, but I do like him in GPPs.
Yeah, I don't mind him. I mean, obviously you mentioned the minutes have been a concern for him. Hasn't been over 30 in each of the last 4 games. Rebounding's been a little bit down, but I mean, obviously you face, Boston is a decent rebound team. Portland's a decent rebound team. I do worry if those peripheral stats don't come. Like you mentioned, he does have to shoot lights out. I mean, he still scored 27 points last time against Orlando, but only 37 fantasy points.
Yeah, like it's coming off of shooting right now, and that's something that I don't want to risk in cash games.
Yeah. Anyone else from? I mean, it's basically those two for me on the Cleveland side. Like Thomas, like 6,500 on DK. I mean, obviously he shot very well. He shot very well the last 2 games. He played 19, 21 minutes, but I can't pay 6,500 for Thomas.
Yeah, you're not paying for Thomas unless you get word that he's going to play like 25, 28 minutes. Dwayne Wade's a little interesting, especially with Thomas starting now. Wade kind of comes off the bench and is kind of the point guard. I don't mind looking at him just because he's still fairly cheap. But with Cleveland, it's pretty much every slate. It's going to be LeBron James and maybe Kevin Love, and that's pretty much it.
Yep. On the Minnesota side, a good spot here. I like a lot of these options. I think you can obviously take some GPP shots with some of the guys that will be lower owned here. But let's start with Jimmy Butler. I know this gripes you and it gripes me as well. The shooting guard only eligibility on DraftKings like completely bothers me. And especially tonight when Lou Williams is 500 less, Oladipo's 200 more. It pains me.
It's so frustrating. Like, just give him multi-position eligibility. Like, I mean, for what, first half of the season, they had Andrew Wiggins at small forward, power forward. Like, if you're gonna concede that he's a power forward at times, just give Jimmy Butler small forward eligibility, because like it makes it really tough whenever you only have 3 spots that you can roster Jimmy Butler in. And there's a ton of really solid guard options, but I think he's an excellent option tonight. I don't really see a reason to fade him. Like, the usage is there for him. He's running the point at times. He's taken pretty much all the usage from Tyus Jones. I love Jimmy Butler here. I think it's a great spot. He's got to be fired up to play against LeBron. Just really not much to say. Like, just roll him out there. I mean, I think that he's got 55, 60 point upside here, and he's still just way too cheap.
Yeah, I'm with you. Guy I'll be getting some exposure to. Before we kind of jump into the front court here, Andrew Wiggins, I don't know what it is, new year, new me here, but he's starting to kind of get some peripheral stats, like, 2 or more steals in 3 of the last 4 games. Like, he's 5 blocks over the last 2 games. He's been rebounding at a decent rate. Still pretty cheap. He's also a guy who has shown up against Cleveland in the past. Obviously, that was pre-Butler, but he's an interesting kind of GPP pivot away from Butler.
Well, yeah, he has the revenge narrative against Cleveland, so of course he's going to show up. I mean, he's just another guy. Like, I mean, it's an excellent spot here against a Cleveland team that defense is just pretty much optional for the majority of the season. Wouldn't say no to using him. You mentioned, rebounding, blocks, assists, steals. They've been there in a couple of the last few games. GPPs only, like, you can't use him in cash because for the majority of the season, the sample size we have with him is pretty much he only scores and does nothing else. I mean, was it Twitter had the Andrew Wiggins drinking game for a while where he drank every time he got a rebound and he'd only end up taking like 2 shots a night. So, I mean, the upside, we've seen the upside out of him, 40, plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 4. Price at 6K on DraftKings is still way too cheap. I think FanDuel, it's a little higher because he's up to 64, but that's still a solid price for him. I definitely don't mind using him in this matchup.
Uh, Tyus Jones has been going the opposite direction. You mentioned the usage. Usage really hasn't been there for Tyus Jones. It's just been a minutes thing, and he's been able to get steals. That's kind of what's helped contribute to his floor, in previous times filling in for Teague. Mints are still there. He's 4,500 on DK. I don't mind him taking a shot at GPPs just because I think people are just completely done with them, and I understand it. But if you're rolling out multiple lineups, he's worth a look in this game.
Yeah, you can use him. He's not a guy that I'm primarily focusing on. I think you're getting a better floor out of guys like Brogdon and a few of these other guys that we've talked about. But if you want to take a shot on him in a matchup against a Cleveland team that's really struggled against point guards this season, go for it.
Yep. Gibson, Towns. I like Towns quite a bit here tonight. I don't mind paying up for him. Once again, as the bonuses with this Minnesota side, the starters are always going to log 35 plus minutes. He's done well against obviously Cleveland in the past. Has been playing well of late. He's not a bad option to build around tonight.
Talk about new year, new me. Karl-Anthony Towns. It's yarn season for Cat. Back-to-back games, 16 rebounds, 23 rebounds, 21 points, 25 points. Rebounding's there. Obviously, the scoring is there for him, especially without Teague. He is getting the ball more and is able to score a little bit more. I do worry a little bit. He's going to probably spend some time covering Kevin Love, which may end up stretching him out and pulling him away from the basket a little bit. But they could always just throw Taj on Love and keep Towns, near the rim. So he's a great option. 9,200 on DraftKings. It's a good spot for him. I don't mind taking a shot in cash games and GPPs.
Yep. You mentioned Gibson here. Kind of flies under the radar because there's some other options that we've highlighted already. I don't mind him. Once again, he has a pretty safe floor here, but I think there's other options.
I think on DraftKings, he's in play at 5,500. FanDuel, he's over 6K. I don't really want to go there.
We get into some of the later games where we're dealing with some of the injuries and a little bit tougher to break down. We got the Spurs and Kings here tonight. Spurs on a back-to-back, which is always worrisome. Obviously, Kawhi Leonard dealing with the tear in his shoulder. Danny Green questionable. Rudy Gay still out. There's some value here for Spurs side if you can get it right.
Yeah, before we hop in, Andre Drummond is probable for tonight's game. So basically that means he's out.
It really does. By Lillard's logic, in Portland's logic, that's out.
Yeah, and by Philly's logic, out is actually in. But yeah, you mentioned the Spurs being on the back-to-back. Kawhi Leonard, he hasn't been, from what I've seen, he hasn't actually been ruled out. But when they were talking about the shoulder tear, they said that they there was still a chance he could play on Thursday, which is against the Lakers. They didn't mention tonight's game, which leads me to believe that they don't expect him to play. I'm operating under the assumption that he's out. Danny Green, they talked about shutting down for an extended period of time. I would expect him to actually be out as well. Manu Ginobili, this is a back-to-back. He's coming off some 2 really, really solid games. I don't expect him to play. And I think Pau Gasol probably sits tonight's game out too. So could be a ton of value for the Spurs here. You're just kind of waiting to see what Popovich is going to do, which is not a easy thing to do.
Yeah, it's it's going to start off obviously with Aldridge. We've been in this situation before where, the shot attempts are going to be there if he gives it a full go tonight. I don't expect Pop to sit Aldridge here. It hasn't really been the case all year. He's been the glue to this team that keeps on rolling. So 7,700 price tag against this Sacramento front court. That's not a great rebounding team. Obviously, both these teams slower in pace, but Aldridge could be a great guy to build around too, and kind of at a discount for the potential spot he's in.
Yeah, and Aldridge just rested a couple games ago, so he's good to go. He's not going to rest tonight. Like I said, I think it's Powell and the rest of the guys. And assuming that we're without Green, Gay, Manu, and Kawhi, you're looking at a 33% usage rate for LaMarcus Aldridge. He's a guy just coming off a big game against Portland. really safe cash game option, really high ceiling, especially if you're looking on DraftKings. He's only 7,700. That's just too cheap for LaMarcus Aldridge. Like, you're looking at a guy that's probably going to get you 45, 50 fantasy points at that price tag.
Kyle Anderson, obviously a guy I don't mind. Obviously he's been, kind of average fantasy points per minute player. He's been a pretty strong rebounder, which I think in this matchup you can get a few extra rebounds. At 5K, small forward eligibility on DraftKings. He's a little pricey on FanDuel, where he is 5,700. Like, he's the same price as Gerald Green. You have a couple guys a little bit cheaper. I don't mind going with him tonight. He's got a pretty stable floor here.
Yeah, he's a guy who's playing a decent amount of minutes, and especially without Manu and the rest of these guys, you'd expect that to continue. I don't really like him in GPPs. I don't think he has 30-plus fantasy point upside, but in cash games, you're pretty much locking in a safe floor, so I don't mind going there. The rest of the guys, though, like I said, you're kind of just waiting on news. Like, I think Davis Bertans is really, really interesting. If we get like Pau Gasol being out, the guards, you're looking at Tony Parker, who should be back tonight, but still questionable. He's interesting. I think DeJounte Murray's in play if Parker sits. I don't really want to mess with Patty Mills. Like, Popovich has talked about how Mills is really, really struggling to adjust to playing the role that Popovich has asked him to. So I don't really want to go there. And with Bryn Forbes and Brandon Paul and the rest of these guys, you're waiting on the news to see which one of them is going to be in play.
I was going to mention Forbes. He's kind of interesting. 27, 32, 40 minutes the last 3 games, 10, 16, 15 real points. Hasn't done a ton else. The big game against Phoenix, he did have 3 steals. For bare min, I don't mind it, especially on FanDuel if you're going stars and scrubs. Like, if everything falls in a way where we're getting all those guys out, he should see 25-plus minutes here tonight.
Yeah, I don't mind it on FanDuel. He's up to almost 4K on DraftKings. That is, but like, if in cash games, I think you can definitely go there. I don't think he has the ability to pay off that salary for GPPs.
Yep. Sacramento, this is another one where we're getting questionable tags with Zach Randolph, George Hill, both, kind of non-really injury related. George Hill is obviously pregnancy, not him, his wife. Zach Randolph has, dentist issues. I don't know what the hell's going on with Randolph outside of that, but I don't like Sacramento here. I just don't.
Is this the second time this season that Randolph has missed extended time because of oral surgery? Like, I seem to remember him missing time earlier this season, like 3 or 4 games because of oral surgery.
I'm gonna check into that while you maybe mention some Kings.
Yeah, You're waiting on the news here for the Kings. It will be interesting to see if George Hill sits out. You're already missing Frank Mason. I think you're obviously looking at De'Aaron Fox, who's a guy who's going to play a decent amount of minutes. I don't think he has that much upside, though. Like, I mean, we saw 32 fantasy points out of him against Denver. This is the Spurs, though, not quite the same matchup. But again, 33, 35 minutes over the last 2. He's a little bit interesting in cash games. Willie Cauley-Stein's been playing out of his mind recently. I definitely don't mind going back to the well there. Played 31 minutes against San Antonio last time out, 41 fantasy points. Shot attempts, double-digit shot attempts in 3 of the last 4. Rebounding numbers are up. 7 steals against Denver is insane, but the defensive numbers have been there for him. So I do kind of like Willie Cauley-Stein here as well. And Buddy Hield is a guy that I have interest in GPPs if George Hill and Zach Randolph are out, just because he has a decent amount of usage, and he did torch the San Antonio team last time out.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you there. News on Randolph, it was just a foot issue in that time that he missed earlier this season. So
I swear somebody else from this team has missed time because of dental. I don't remember. I'll have to go back and look it up, but neither here nor there, to be honest.
Anyone else you want to talk about there?
Bogdan Bogdanović is a little bit interesting. He's a guy that they've kind of talked about using as a primary ball handler a little bit. Minutes have been solid for him. It's been over 20 fantasy points in 5-6 straight, I think. So he's a guy that you could look at as well. But getting a ton of exposure to this game doesn't feel that great. Obviously that we know the Kings are bad. I was telling you before we started, the Spurs are 1-4 this season on the second game of road back-to-backs. but they've also beaten the Kings in 11 straight games. So one of those things that's going to have to change. If you think this game stays close, you could get exposure on both sides with, both teams being shorthanded. But I would be shocked if either one of these teams scored over 100 points tonight.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a game you're willing to rule out and just don't want to kind of pay attention to, it's probably this one tonight, 199 over under. Both these teams are bottom 3 in pace. Like, just not a lot to love really outside of Aldridge, and really Willie Cauley-Stein's the guy that I'd take the most shots on the King side.
Yeah, I agree there.
So, Denver Golden State 226 over under. I feel like this is somewhat of a tricky Denver side to kind of predict tonight. I want to get some exposure, but I kind of just like other guys more. I think Trey Lyles is probably my favorite option off this Denver side.
Yeah, he's a guy that I have a lot of interest in. Just solid production, solid amount of minutes. Like his price is starting to climb, where it is getting a little out of hand. But the dude's been over 30 fantasy points in 5 straight games, and he's getting you like high 20s in those other games. Minutes are solid, double-digit field goal attempts whenever he sees the floor. Rebounding upside here. It's just a consistent producer. I love this spot for him going up against Golden State. I don't really see a reason to get off of him here. I think he's my favorite exposure to the Denver side of this. And then Jokic is another guy that I have a lot of interest in. Mostly on DraftKings. He's another guy that, like we mentioned with Cousins, he's very frustrating to use on FanDuel because like he has a tendency to turn it over. I mean, 5, 2, 6, 2, 2, 1, 2, 4, 10 turnovers over his last 9 games. Like, really, really frustrating when you see a guy putting up like 20 and 10 and then getting like negative 10 points because he's turning the ball over so much.
Yeah, I mean, that's the risky run. I like the price tag on DK at 8,100. I don't mind taking some shots there. As far as the backcourt goes, it's obviously been Harris, Barton, Murray. Murray's a guy when he shoots well, he'll play 35 plus minutes, but if he gets off to a rough start, like we've seen, them kind of turn away from him, which is always worrisome. But I don't like the backcourt as much here. I think Barton and Harris are interesting, more so Barton though, but more so on DK as well. They're both under 6K, but on FanDuel, they're both over 6K.
Yeah, I think I'm leaning Barton. He's the guy that Malone has used to spell Harris and Jamal Murray frequently, and he comes off the bench and runs that second unit. So I do like him. He has a good history against the Warriors as well. So he's a guy that I do have the most interest. If I were to rank them, it would be Lyles, Jokic, Barton, and then the rest of the Harris and Murray guys.
Yep, I'm with you. Any interest in Wilson Chandler here? He's been god awful, but the minutes continue to be there. He's below 5K on both sides. I don't hate it in GPPs because he does have 30 plus fantasy point upside.
Yeah, you can go there in GPPs, but you mentioned he's been god awful, and he has been really, really bad this season.
So, yeah, that's probably going to continue.
Yeah.
Golden State, everyone's basically probable. They did that for us and listed them probable. Thank you, Golden State. That helps a whole lot.
Yeah. Everyone but Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant is questionable. Everyone else is probable.
Yeah, for some reason, I don't completely trust Draymond Green tonight for some reason, like actually being probable.
I don't know that I trust the majority of that injury report being probable, but that's probably because we've been burned so many times before by that probable tag. But it's another one, like Steve Kerr has been pretty good outside of like one occurrence of Draymond Green. Steve Kerr has been really good about getting that information out early in the afternoon. So you're kind of just waiting on that. I think if Kevin Durant sits, which I actually kind of expect him to, like, I don't think he's actually injured. Like, I think what they're doing is because Durant had to shoulder so much of the offensive load in so many minutes when Curry was out, they're just kind of resting him. So I think he probably sits, and in which case, like, Curry is just a flat out absolute lock and load for me tonight.
Yeah, I mean, sign me up. He's dropping 80-point games and basically playing 25 minutes. Like, he's going out of control. And obviously you're just kind of hoping that, Denver can keep this one close to the point where we see Curry kind of truly hit like a huge ceiling because he's been there in basically each of the last 4 or 5 games. But yeah, I mean, he's the reason basically if Durant sits, I'm not as high on Paul because I can get Curry for cheaper on FanDuel. I'll pay the extra 500 more for Curry, who's just shown so much ceiling.
Yeah, I don't think it matters if it stays close. I mean, when he put up 45 real points in 3 quarters against the Clippers, So like, I don't
I
think it
want
really.
90, Brent. I want 90.
I don't necessarily think it matters. Like, I mean, he's just an insanely good play. Like, talked about how good he's been since returning. It's averaging 36 points on 58.4% shooting and 53.8% shooting from beyond the arc since returning from his injury. That's just ridiculous. Just don't fade him. Like, this is one of those situations where you're going to be sitting pretty, like, going into this game, and then like Kevin Durant's going to be out, and you're just going to watch your little dudes moving backwards and backwards and backwards and backwards because Stephen Curry is going to be putting up like 60.
He's made 8, 4, 6, and 10 3-point attempts over his last 4 games. I want you to tell me or if you think this is true or not. And I read this somewhere, so you can either believe it or it's BS. When he was sitting out, he was sitting in the dark with a blindfold on, making shots and just taking them off the thing by sitting down.
That doesn't surprise me. Yeah, I would actually believe that's something that he would do.
I don't know if it's for a fact, but I did just make that up. So I think it would be something you believe in, right?
I would believe it's something that he would do. I mean, he did have a quote where he talked about how much work he was able to put in while he was injured and trying to come back. So it wouldn't surprise me if he wasn't like sitting in the dark, sitting at half court with a blindfold on, shooting threes, just swishing them.
I'd pay money to watch that.
Yeah,
I couldn't see it, but as far as other guys go here, I don't mind Draymond Green. Obviously, a good spot for him. We've seen him, blow up a couple times already, shown that triple-double upside. He's another one where turnovers have kind of started to hurt him a little bit on FanDuel.
Yeah, I think you can still definitely go there if he plays. Obviously, you said you don't believe the probable tag for him, but so we'll just have to keep an eye on that. But definitely has plenty of upside here in this matchup against Denver. I do like him. If Kevin Durant sits, I like whoever moves into the starting lineup for him, whether it's Omri Caspi or Andre Iguodala. Both of them are excellent options. I think Clay has a ton of GPP appeal in the spot. Although, I do start to worry about matchups against Gary Harris because Gary Harris is a very good and underrated defender. But, yeah, and a guy that you can look at in GPPs. Everyone from Golden State is kind of in consideration. We're just waiting on that injury news.
Yeah, definitely. I don't mind Thompson. Usually a guy I don't like, but, I think there's so much kind of going against him right now in terms of people trying to use him where he hasn't shown the upside. But 40-plus fantasy points in 2 of the last 3 games, people have kind of written him off as a guy who's only getting 30 fantasy points.
Yeah, he has upside, and it's just a matter of using him in the right matchups. And when some of these guys are out, especially Durant, he's taking some of those extra shots that you're missing with Durant. And I mean, look, 16, 20, 19 field goal attempts over his last 4 games. That's an insane amount of shooting. He just needs those shots to fall because he doesn't really do that much else.
Yep. Atlanta and LA here. Atlanta on the back-to-back, but this is in LA. Atlanta, also, their stars didn't play a ton of minutes last night anyway due to the blowout. They rolled out a full rotation. So I'm not too worried here with the Atlanta side on the back-to-back, but I'm also not super thrilled with it just because we've seen some of their minutes start to drop, especially for Bazemore and Prince and these guys.
Yeah, obviously we want to wait and see. Prince was able to return to that game last night after dislocating a finger or something like that, but you never know, they could rest him or something like that. I don't have any interest really in Atlanta. Maybe Dennis Schroeder in GPPs, but this team has been so bad recently. There's just so many better places to go, especially at what these guys are priced at. John Collins is the guy that I think has the most upside out of any of these players, but he's just not getting the minutes. And that really frustrates me because he's been one of their most productive players when he's been on the floor. He just can't get on the floor. So they're all, Collins and Schroeder are guys that I'd look at in GPPs, maybe some Urson, but none of these guys are that intriguing here.
Yeah, you mentioned Schroeder. I have some GPP interest because that price is down and obviously the usage is going to be there. Ilyasova, I don't hate. I don't know exactly if I want to pay 5.9 for him on DraftKings, but he has shown 30-plus fantasy point upside. Probably will be overlooked with Ibaka and Sabonis right there. He's not the worst play in the world. I don't mind Collins. I always don't mind Collins.
Yeah, I wish Collins was getting more minutes, but with Ilyasova, the biggest concern that I have, and I don't think it's going to be an issue tonight with Muscala probably not playing on the second half of a back-to-back, but Coach Budenholzer talked about how much he liked the lineup of Muscala and Luke Babbitt together. They closed out the game, not against the Lakers, but in their previous game before that, they closed it out, and Budenholzer was praising how well they played together. And he said that he wanted to use that lineup more often, and he didn't do it last game. So who knows if he's actually going to do it, but that does concern me with Ilyasova.
That is a sentence I never thought I would hear in the NBA. Let's move to the Clippers side. Austin Rivers, obviously out tonight. Teodosic is a guy who's questionable, probably more on the doubtful side. Been dealing with injuries all year long. It's obviously going to leave plenty of minutes, and you have an interesting take. Obviously, I think this is going to be contrarian to what most of the industry is thinking here, so I'll let you kind of take it away.
Yeah, with Teodosic, he's not expected to play. Like Doc Rivers actually came out and said that he's listed as questionable, but he doesn't expect him to suit up. He's dealing with plantar fasciitis. And given how snake bitten they have been with injuries, I would be shocked to see them even try to push Teodosic out there. So I would expect him to sit. Obviously, that opens up a ton of usage for Lou Williams, who is just a guy that you just don't fade him. Don't even fade him. Don't try to outsmart the field. Don't worry about ownership. Just plug him into all your lineups and move on. The guy that's interesting to me, and I wrote about him in the GPP article, he, as of right now, without Teodosic news, is just a complete dart throw. He's still pretty risky, even if Teodosic is ruled out. But Tyrone Wallace was signed to the team, coming off the G League, off the Clippers G League team. Played 31 minutes against Golden State. Some of that was in blowout run, but some of it wasn't. Shot 4 of 12 from the field, put up 25 fantasy points. He's 3,600 across the industry. Jawan Evans is a guy that gets in foul trouble a lot. Like if you just look at his game logs, he has like 4 or 5 fouls in 14 minutes sometimes. Doc Rivers talked about how he wanted to get a guy like Wallace in the lineup so that he can be the primary ball handler, so Lou Williams doesn't have to be that all the time. I think he's a guy that you can look at in GPPs and expect to get 28, 30 minutes here. And I think he's going to be a better option than Jawan Evans tonight.
Yeah, and you're also getting contrarian upside. Like I think ceilings are kind of relatively similar.
Yeah, like Evans again, you're looking at a guy who gets in foul trouble. Kind of a similar player. Like the thing with Evans, like the games where we saw him have massive upside, what he'd have like 50 fantasy points in that one game. What he'd have like 4 or 5 steals or something like that. And the rest of it was a little bit of scoring. But like, I think you're looking at a guy that's Evans, just not going to be a guy that gets a lot of run tonight, I don't think.
Yep. And obviously with the front court, we're dealing with Blake Griffin doubtful for tonight's game. I don't think he's been ruled out yet, but Doc Rivers didn't expect him to play as well.
He has been ruled out.
He got ruled out. Oh, all right. Yeah. I mean, so if you're looking like FanDuel doesn't have anything up, he's still questionable on DraftKings. I know RotoWorld's last update was still Doc Rivers saying he didn't play, but yeah. So with him, I mean, I think DeAndre Jordan's going to be a little bit popular tonight. I don't mind him. This is a spot where he could arguably just grab 40 rebounds and, obviously put up over 40 fantasy points last time these two played. Upside came against that OKC game in kind of a random spot. Otherwise, he's been kind of a safer play rate in that 30-35 fantasy point range.
Yeah, and you would expect that with Blake Griffin being back. Some of he was getting a few extra assist numbers without Blake Griffin, extra rebounds and things like that without Griffin. And when Griffin came back, some of those numbers went down, but you'll start to see those numbers climb back up. I mean, 37 minutes, 14 points, 16 rebounds against Atlanta last time out. We know Atlanta's a terrible rebounding team, terrible rim protection team. They're giving up a ton of second chance points, 14.3 to be exact. Like, I think this is, assuming this game stays close, which it absolutely should, I think there's 20-20 upside here for DeAndre Jordan. I absolutely love him. Like that game, that last game he had where he put up 42 against Atlanta, Blake Griffin played in that game and he still put up 14 and 16. So you take Blake Griffin out, again, I think 20-20 upside here for DeAndre Jordan, and 7,800 on DraftKings. He's 83 on FanDuel. Like, I think he's my core center play and I'm building around him.
Yep. Guys that have been kind of filling in here, like they don't have a lot of interest of Sam Decker, Wesley Johnson. Montrezl Harrell's popped off for a couple of games here, of late. We've seen some upside out of him, but minutes are just kind of all over the place with him, even when Griffin sits.
Yeah, Harrell's a little bit interesting. I will note that Another reason why I actually like Tyrone Wallace is Jamil Wilson was getting key rotation minutes for the Clippers, and they waived him to sign Tyrone Wallace. So that was actually another wing slash big that the team had that they could roll out there. They don't have him anymore. You're not seeing a bunch of minutes like Bryce Johnson. I don't even think is with the team. Oh wait, he was recalled last night, wasn't he? Yeah, he was recalled last night, but like he's not playing minutes. You have Willie Reed, Montrezl Harrell, Sam Decker. These guys are going to have to eat up a ton of minutes without Blake Griffin and without Danilo Gallinari. I think I would rank him Harrell first because he can actually play point or power forward. The biggest issue with him is he doesn't have a ton of upside alongside DeAndre Jordan because he is a rim roller kind of player, and with DeAndre in the paint, like you're not really rolling to the rim. So I think you can use him in cash games. I think he would be the guy that I would look at the most. Don't really have any interest in anyone else.
No, definitely not. This Clippers side very thin for fantasy production. So I'd say here, definitely a very fun slate. Obviously, we've mentioned the news that you do need to keep an eye on. 8-game slate, a lot of studs. Let's go highest score here.
Are we restricting price at all?
I don't think. I mean, there's enough studs where I think we can differ.
Steph Curry.
Maybe not. Give me Giannis here. That game stays close and he goes to town again.
There we go.
So that's going to wrap it up for us. You can go to DaveFantasyCafe.com, check out Brent's GPP article, cheat sheets as well, and check out the optimizer, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.
Good luck.